welcome to the testing review for the Winging It F1 podcast. 2023 Formula One is days away from competitive running. We've had the testing, the 3-day test in Bahrain, and we're raring to go for our fourth F1 season as the Winging It F1 podcast. I'm Freddie. I'm going to be hosting our little testing roundup today, and I'm with Adam Dickinson and Nigel Chu, who are also going to be talking about their favourite and least favourite and wacky reviews of testing. Adam, how are you? Are you wacky?
Wackiness is amped up to 11, so I'm ready to take on this review of testing. Spent a lot of time on my sofa watching testing, so I need to get out more. Is the takeaway. My main takeaway from testing.
We knew that anyway. Nigel, someone who's a social butterfly who's always getting out a lot. How was it? How was it returning to the corner of your bedroom with a laptop to look at testing times and criticize?
It was not that funny. Adam, stop laughing, man.
You laughing for 10 seconds straight.
Oh my God, Adam's fake laughing or not. It's quite demonic. It's terrifying.
I don't even know what that D word means.
Demonic.
What does that mean?
Figure it out. Come on.
Domino's?
Yeah, sure.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, right. I did have a pizza dinner. It wasn't Domino's, but yeah, well, that was in London. Anyway, what was your question, Freddie?
How are you?
Good.
Okay, brilliant.
Same question that he asks every episode. The only time it's not asked is when you're presenting and you
just go right. There's no
I don't believe in asking people.
You know how we are.
We've already talked about it. We know how everyone is. Let's just get on with the podcast. But Nigel, we weren't recording then, so people don't know. It doesn't matter. We know, and that's all that matters.
And you usually make some inappropriate comment that either Adam or I have to edit out.
Except we don't.
We don't, no, because we like stitching you up as we are now. Yeah. But anyway, someone who also likes to stitch other people up is Red Bull Racing because they were the best team in testing. That was terrible.
Max Verstappen probably does like to stitch people up, to be fair, with his character.
Is he a medical
he stitched
professional?
Perez up.
Oh, I thought you meant like as in...
No, I'm okay. Red Bull looked basically untouchable in testing, which is hard to do. You couldn't really point at them and say anything wrong that happened. They lost a little bit of bodywork at the start of the second day, perhaps, but apart from that, I don't think there was anything you could point to that was negative about Red Bull, apart from probably domination. But it depends on your opinion of that.
They lost a sensor on the third day.
They lost a sensor on the third day.
That was negative, I guess.
But that sensor wasn't needed because the car was so serene.
I don't think they're as dominant as people think. Well, I don't know how dominant you think they're going to be, but I don't think they're that far ahead. I think because Christian Horner, he said they were running an unusual, different testing program, and I kind of looked at that, and from what I saw, the first day, Verstappen's long runs were rapid. Like he was in the 36s, and the only other driver to get in the 136s in the whole week of testing was Fernando Alonso with his rapid race stint on the final day. So it looks like to me, Red Bull chucked everything at the first day and then experimented on the second and third days, but tested different setups and different parts and that kind of thing. So the best day was the first day. Then after that, they just kind of did their own thing. Whereas everyone else kind of did the best stuff on the final days or final 2 days. So I think they are ahead, but it equally wouldn't surprise me if they're only a tenth or two ahead when it comes to qualifying. And then race pace, maybe they'll have better tyre wear than Ferrari and Mercedes. But I don't think they're going to dominate the early part of the season from what I've seen.
That's interesting. Do you think there's an argument that throwing all guns at day one then allows them to be so confident that they can be experimental and weird on day 2 and 3 rather than having to sort of do an ordinary testing program because they've got a bit more in the bag, do you think?
Potentially. I think, well, that's the thing, isn't it? The fact they were so quick straight out on the blocks, which has been a general trait of Red Bull over the last 10, 12 years, apart from 2020, maybe when the early parts of that when Racing Point were beating them. Apart from 2020 and maybe 1 or 2 other years, the car's been super quick straight away, in free practice 1 on race weekends. So it's easy to drive. Both drivers seem pretty happy with it. Obviously, they're not going to tell us too much, but I know Helmut Marko, take this with a pinch of salt if you want. He did say they found a balance which both drivers are happy with. So yes, you could say, them being quick on day one and doing all the stuff on the other days is ominous, to use that testing word. But I don't know, maybe it's just me hoping that the other teams are closer. But I just don't get the feeling that they are as good as people think, I think.
Adam, what's your Red Bull evaluation?
Well, it's just if they could do that on the first day and have the quickest or like joint quickest race sim on the first day, and Alonso was the only other one who could echo that, then that kind of seems more ominous in a way because they could get that done straight out the blocks and then get down to actually testing the car. So whereas the other team had more of that benefit and then went into that race sim, if that's what you're saying. So yeah, I'm not. I don't know. Like both of you, I'd like there to be some competition, but it did seem very ominous in that they were fastest on the race runs and fastest on when it looked like everyone was going, for the fastest time at the end of the session. Obviously, fastest times in testing is always a pinch of salt, but yeah, it's just like when you when you look at it, I think there's just not a reason. When I look at that, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't be favourites going into Bahrain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they are definitely favourites. I just don't think they'll dominate. Although it depends on what we think dominate. It's not going to be
dominate
2014,
is an easy.
2015, 2016 Mercedes dominate.
No.
It's going to be
Do you
more
think do you think they could easily win it?
They will win the first race, but I don't think pole position will be easy. I think
Okay.
Ferrari have got something on their bag, which we'll get on to.
Well, yeah. Well, speaking about Ferrari, moving on to Ferrari, obviously last year's out the blocks winners 1-2 in Bahrain in 2022, at the advent of this rule set. I would argue they've had a weird testing program as well, but they've been running sort of similar programs with each driver, and have been pretty. If you're looking at all the times and things like that, if you compare it between Sainz and Leclerc, they've been pretty close to each other. So they're definitely getting the same things out of the car, which is encouraging, particularly at an early stage. On performance, tire wear looks like to be a gremlin still. For Ferrari, they had a few issues with that last year, but the power unit seems to be reliable and decent. No sort of qualms with that. Where do you guys put Ferrari then? Really, if we think, because I think there's an argument that could be made that that they're actually their strength, which was qualifying form, isn't going to be as strong this year.
Well, they seem pretty happy with the test, especially by the end of the third day. There were kind of a few more pensive looks on the first day, but actually they did look like they had found something as the test went on, as did a few teams, to be fair. But yeah, I still think it will be more of a strength. I think qualifying will be more of a strength than their race day, but I think it will be less of a strength, and I'm not sure their race pace, race running, tyre wear will be able to bridge that gap, to be honest. So it's a weird one because I think Red Bull are further away from Ferrari now than they were last season. But in general, I think the pack has closed up to where they are in terms of pace, but I'm just not sure there is that battle at the front, kind of. So yeah, I think as a whole, the field is closer, but actually we may not see that, especially at the start of the season, because I'm not sure Ferrari have it to take it to. Obviously, it's only one track. Obviously, it's testing all those caveats, but certainly at the Bahrain Grand Prix, I don't really think that Ferrari, without something going wrong with Red Bull, I don't think that they have it to win.
I think Ferrari, out of the big three teams, are saving the most because weirdly, I don't know why it's the reason, the rear wing they ran for the whole test was a low downforce. It was a high down. No, was it a low downforce? They ran a rear wing, which wouldn't be the one they're going to use next weekend. I can't remember which one it was.
I think it was high downforce.
Yeah. So I think they've got a lot more to come just from that. And from what the drivers were saying, especially Sainz, last year they went for a lot of fast lap times in testing. That's why we all got so excited about them. Whereas this year they've done the complete opposite. They've not done many flying laps at all. Yes, Leclerc did a fast one in the last morning session, so I said one fast one in the final evening session, but he did focus a lot on testing, as he meant to do in testing. And I think they are trying to find the weaknesses. And yes, their tyre didn't look great, but Bahrain is the most high-tech tyre circuit apart from Barcelona, maybe, on the whole calendar. So
Yes,
I think Ferrari were experimenting the most out of the big three teams, and they definitely didn't show their hand in one lap pace. I'd even go as far as saying I've got a feeling they can still fight for pole position next weekend.
it'll be an interesting one to see, particularly with the tyre wear. You raised that point. The softest tyres that were used in this test that were producing good times won't be on offer come race weekend because of the allocation Pirelli are providing. I'll pick your brains on this one with Ferrari. Do you think they ever did proper low fuel running?
No, I don't think so. I think they've got a lot to come, which is why I'm still. I think it's the team with the biggest question mark out of the whole grid, actually.
It's interesting. I agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too doom. If you're a Ferrari fan, I wouldn't be too doom and gloom because just the way Ferrari are. Yeah.
We've had the all the sort of traditional Ferrari bingo games, the sort of positive noises from Maranello through the off season kind of thing, that they've got the best power unit, all that kind of stuff, and they're not going to be a number one driver. The classic Ferrari preseason calling cards. Fred Vasseur seems to be a welcome improvement to that team. There seems to be no sort of disagreements and everything. The projection is good, but admittedly, we're not in the thralls of the season. You're right.
Zero races.
Yes, exactly. 0 races. But yes, it's an interesting one for Ferrari, and I think another interesting one is Mercedes, who obviously were the third fastest team. We're in their sort of Mercedes no man's land, sort of A class and a half before the B class midfield of Formula One last year. There is obviously a lot riding on them in terms of expectation for this year. Is this the year they can bring it back to the Mercedes we are used to for the turbo hybrid era? But it's not been plain sailing for them, you could say. They've had teething issues that have been different on each day. They've not really been able to close on consistency across the test. We've had some busy evenings throughout their test as well. So, and Lewis Hamilton is quite visibly and quite vocally playing down their chances. Classic Lewis Hamilton, but in a test, it's quite specific what he's saying about sort of the fact that no porpoising, but all the balance issues are still there, and we've got rid of one problem, but we've kept a lot of others basically, and that's quite specific to say in the test. Adam, what do you think about where Mercedes are at with their double down, very weird shaped boat of a car?
I think it's definitely a step forward from where they were last season, and I think over the course of the season they probably, I think they'll be more competitive than where they might be at the first few races. But yeah, I think to start with, they are, I'd say, clearly the third best team, or clearly not in the top two best teams, because we'll get onto Aston in a minute. But yeah, I think the drivers look a lot more comfortable in the car, but like you say, they are very downplaying their chances at the start of the season. They're saying we're not going to be in the championship fight at the start of the season, but we think and we hope that we can come through. So yeah, I think that tells its own story, really. I don't really see why they'd be that specific about it if they're not. They think that they are at the front and can compete for the race win at the start. So yeah, I'm not all doom and gloom on Mercedes either, really. Like you said with Ferrari, I'd say don't despair, but it may take a while for their efforts to show through and actually to be able to work on this car through the season. But I don't think it's clearly they're in a much better position from last season, which I think is the main, I guess, headline and main positive that they'll take away.
Yeah, much better than testing last year. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. The bounce of the car looks a lot better. Hamilton was, I don't know if he was intentionally driving over the limit, but had some massive oversteering slides. I mean, he did this a couple of years ago in 2021 as well, and then he went and won the first Grand Prix, albeit a bit controversially, of course, with the track limits and that kind of thing. So I think that was a case of Hamilton just pushing the limits a bit rather than the Mercedes having big bounce or oversteer problems. Just did seem to be a lack of pace in race sims and over one lap because, and obviously we don't know the fuel loads and that kind of thing. But if Perez is 3 tenths faster than Hamilton, you'd expect Verstappen to be at least half a second faster than Hamilton, perhaps. And then the race sims, especially from, I think it was Russell on the Saturday before he broke down, didn't look that promising at all. Aston Martin were faster. But then I think Hamilton had a pretty good final session. So it's tricky with Mercedes. I think they are behind Ferrari. I think they are closer to Red Bull compared to what they were in the first race last year. It's almost a continuation of the second half of last season, I'd say, in terms of the big three teams. I think Red Bull still got a bit of an advantage. Ferrari can still challenge in qualifying for me. They just didn't show it in the test. And then obviously, and then Mercedes are kind of in between, but then are kind of third overall. So, and then we have to see the true race pace at a full-blown Grand Prix weekend. So it looks like they've all made, to me, a similar amount of improvement. Now, I mean, you guys possibly think Red Bull a bit more, but it's to not a million miles away, Mercedes. And I think the deficit they will have is recoverable during the season, especially with Red Bull's budget cap penalty.
I mean, just quickly, they did seem to improve a lot through the test. They had the breakdown on at the end of day 2, but they had. But in terms of the race sims, I think Russell's on the morning of day 3 is the one to look at because they did on day 1. It felt a lot more pessimistic around them, and Hamilton's racing was shorter anyway. But I think it's Russell's that is the one to look at out of that. And yes, it still wasn't as quick as Perez on day 2, but yeah, they did seem to have improvement through the test, Freddie.
Yeah, you're right to say that because that was the point I was going to make. That if you look at the third day, there's a marked improvement and marked difference in the way that car is being run. And I do think you're right, Nigel, that Hamilton. So that's a mix up and a half.
That's a big compliment for Adam there, isn't it? Yeah, for once.
Sorry, Lewis. But yeah, I think you're right that Hamilton was pushing for extremities and was boosting the car out and around like that. I think that was for more kind of aero mapping purposes and things like that to sort of test where the car was. And there were snaps that were snaps, but there were also controlled snaps that were also there, in my opinion. And I think if you look at the car on the third day, it actually was in a very decent position. And there'll be a lot to build on for that going into the first race weekend. Is how they build on that with alternative setups on the car, because it does if it's run well in one format but not well in others, then that points to quite a peaky car which could be up and down throughout the season. But the car that we're all looking at and everyone is splitting hairs over for how quick actually is the Aston Martin. And normally with these kind of podcasts you kind of keep to a format of sort of the 2022 constructors format, but we're not doing that. We're just going to go straight in with it. We think the Aston Martin is good enough to be talked about in the same vein as the big 3 teams. And with Fernando Alonso at the wheel, with a car he's visibly not having to fight to get lap time out of, which is why he's been good in cars like McLaren of old and sometimes in the Alpine. He's working this car and getting pace out of it. And even though Aston Martin will be hurt by not having their continuation driver of Lance Stroll at this test, they have, and they've got the only drivers they've had have never driven for Aston Martin in a team process before, with Felipe Drugovich hopping in as well, which we'll get onto as a side topic. They've had a very positive test, haven't they?
Yeah, Nigel. Massively. I mean, Alonso, like I mentioned before, Alonso's racing on the final day, on the final evening, when Perez and Hamilton were going for fastest laps, Tsunoda as well, when they were going for the fast lap times. Alonso did a full-blown race in 50-odd laps. He started on C1 tyre, another C1 tyre, and C2 tyre, so the same tyres that we used at the Bahrain Grand Prix next weekend. and he just got faster and faster, and it was ridiculously consistent. And whereas every other race sim I've seen, apart from Verstappen on the first day, everyone was losing multiple seconds from lap 1 to lap 14, 15 by the end of the stint, like 2, 3 seconds. So it seems like in that sense, he's got more pace to give, because if he can be that consistent, he can probably push a bit harder earlier in the stint. So the lap times were just incredible. Yes, they didn't go for any big one lap pace, but it's the long runs in testing where you can see where a car's going to be good and to be easy to drive, nice on the tyres. We know Alonso from the early Pirelli era when he was at Ferrari, he's very good on his tyres as well. They're going to be right up there. I'd go as far as saying they could be on the podium. Like in qualifying, they might not be challenging, for top 3, top 4 first 2 rows, but going off the race pace, if Ferrari still do have tyre wear troubles, if Mercedes don't have too much in hand, Alonso could be, 3rd or 4th on merit on Sunday, which would be incredible considering they were 7th in the constructors. The step forward they have made, they've got Dan Fallows. This is his first car which he's had which he's overseen fully. It seems like he's had a bit of an impact there because, like we mentioned with Red Bull, it's an easy car to drive. Maybe Fallows has had a bit of input there to make the Aston Martin quick out of the blocks and easy to drive, and it's just all coming together. It's almost a bit like where Racing Point were in 2020 when they were the 2nd or 3rd fastest car, and obviously a lot of the team based from Silverstone are still with Aston Martin now. So it looks like they've made by far the biggest improvement of all the teams. I think Alonso can be on the podium on merit.
Well, big call, but
Very big call.
Yeah, I think it may be. I'm not sure about how they'll end the season. I think in terms of Aston Martin or Mercedes, then I've got a clear indicator of who I think will be ahead at the end of the season. But certainly at the start of the season, then I do think they could be up there. I do think they could be pushing it. They really seem to push. When Alonso was in the car, I think it was on the evening of the first day, then he really seemed to be pushing it harder than anyone else out there. But actually, when they got into the racing, then he was still able to do that across the whole course of his stint, as Nigel said. So I think maybe some of the hype maybe from the first day felt a bit inflated, but actually you did see them back it up later on in the test. So yeah, it's a pretty good way to be going into, if you compare it to last season where it was a bit of a damp squib of a test, then it is such positive momentum. Alonso finally might have made a good career choice.
Yeah, that's one of the kickers is for once Fernando Alonso hasn't made a sideways or downwards move. He's made a potentially an upwards move, and from where he was in with Alpine last year, we were all sort of saying, well, it's kind of the best move he could make would have been to stay at Alpine competitively. Yeah. But no, actually, it's looking like the heart has ruled the head pretty well in this scenario. I would say, based on, as you say, the Racing Point comparison to in 2020, it was, and admittedly, there was a bigger hangover of an entire lockdown sort of stew over this. But from testing for that season, it was all, can Racing Point challenge Ferrari? Will they be able to crack the sort of the Ferrari that's not doing as well in testing as we thought it would? And then granted, we saw that, and Racing Point was legitimately racing the Red Bull, and Ferrari were way off. So there's a lot that could still happen here. And I'm not saying take that as rote and believe that Aston Martin will be ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes and will be.
It could be. I think in long run pace they could be.
They could well be. And with a feisty driver like Alonso, and who knows who's going to be in the second car for the opening races, it could lead to some decent results. I don't think people should discount them at all, and I think it's very easy to say, oh, they'll just top the midfield. I think it's very easy to say that, but if we want to make safe bets, you should say that, but. You could say that you've got Red Bull, then you've got Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin as a legitimate 3 teams that are quite close to each other. Felipe Drugovich. Okay.
reluctantness, not say Aston Martin are, second or third, is because since 2017, it's apart from the Racing Point in 2020, it's always been the big three or big two teams. Do you think it's always because of the last 6-7 years what we've seen in F1? People are almost scared to put another team in. Because that's how I'm kind of feeling about it. Because looking purely at the numbers,
I'm definitely
Aston Martin are right up there.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult call to make because the gap between them is so chunky. There's a second between and things like that. But when you break that down, it's a second from pole position rather than 3 or 4 tenths realistically from the 6th fastest car. So that is a gap that you could find, but to legitimately be way up there, it's not a gap to find. So I think that's why people are hesitant, and that's why I would be hesitant. But if you drum into the facts of it, as you say, the facts are leading to Aston Martin doing well. And if we look back to other teams that have been called well, like Haas was called for from 1 or 2 decent lap times, was called for being okay. They could actually be up there, and they were in 2018. And it made so many people angry, but it happened. These jumps can happen.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I mean, even 2020, I think over the course of the season, Red Bull were, it was Ferrari had dropped down. Obviously, they dropped into the midfield, but I still think Red Bull were clear of Racing Point, and it was just that, it was still that top two. The top teams were clear of the midfield. So yeah, I think it's definitely is that concern. It goes to it covers all areas of the group, which we'll talk about later, or on our season preview podcast. There are that kind of, I guess, like 7th to 10th or 8th to 10th, and then the midfield, and then the top 3 or the top 2, and it covers all areas of the grid. It's like whether you think teams can bridge that divide, but like you say, it's got to be the most compelling case for as long as I can remember, really.
I think that it definitely is compelling. And another storyline that lies with Aston Martin, as the team with all the column inches this week, is their driver lineup because unfortunately Lance Stroll had an injury prior to testing. They've been quite cagey on the injury, and we're not going to speculate on what the injury is, but it's obviously nasty, and it's meant he's had to miss the test. And the working assumption is that he will miss maybe even the first 2 races of the season. And not a great time to be injured, looking at the pace of the car. So he'll be annoyed at himself. But Aston Martin have for essentially a full day of testing, 2 half days, put Felipe Drugovich, their reserve driver and Formula 2 champion, in the car. And Mike Crack has said he hasn't put a foot wrong, and he's performed very well. There have been press rumblings about Sebastian Vettel returning to the team, and naturally, that kind of thing is understandably driven by the dream Vettel Alonso lineup of sort of the early 2010s being something that people are fantasizing about, and a few undenials, let's say, from Aston Martin personnel. But just keeping it with Drugovich, do you think Drugovich would do well if he were in the car for Bahrain race? Nigel?
It depends what you mean by well, but I think
Well,
we'd
I mean,
do
would he,
okay.
would
I
he
mean, I
acquit
rate him
himself
quite
well,
highly.
like decently? I don't think he would be doing what Alonso would do, but like,
Yeah.
I think he would have
I think
satisfactory debut in F1 and would fulfill the brief of reserve driver well.
Yeah, I think if he's within 6, 7, 8 of Alonso in qualified, that would be amazing. And I think he can do that because I think I rate him quite highly given what he did in his F2 season last year with MP Motorsport, who's not really seen as one of the big junior teams, so to dominate and win the championship like that, he must be quite good. And his testing, he didn't do anything silly, didn't do anything stupid, which is always the number 1 rule for any rookie. So I think he'd do well, and he would be my choice over a Vettel or Stoffel. Yes, he is a reserve driver. That there is a part of me thinking, what is the point in having a reserve driver if you're not going to use him? But out of them 3, I would choose Drugovich, I think.
Yeah, I think It's a weird one because actually, until he won the championship in F2, then his junior career was pretty barren. So it was quite that was part of the surprise of it. So, but actually, what gives me the most confidence isn't that; it's that he did well in testing. He seemed, like Nigel said, that he seemed to be able to push the car. He wasn't, he didn't have any spins or anything as far as I can remember. He didn't have any errors. I don't even remember seeing lock up, although I didn't watch the whole thing. But he did. He seems to be well in control of the car, and like Nigel says, if it's anything below 3/4 of a second that he's the gap to Alonso, then he's done a very good job. So, yeah, it's funny because if you had Alonso and Vettel in the same team in the early 2010s, it would be like the best team rivalry that you could think of, and it would just be so hostile by the end, and it'd be fantastic to watch and awful to be a part of. But now it'd just be kind of friendly and like happy campers, really. So it'd be a weird kind of dynamic of this dream lineup that isn't how it would have been if they were both at the peak of their powers. But yeah, it'd be nice to see Vettel back with Alonso, but in terms of actually seeing new drivers on the grid, seeing new drivers given a chance, especially ones who haven't come from the highest backing or anything like that, which is where Drugovich is from, then yeah, it'd be fantastic to see him given the shot, and I think he would do a competent job of it.
Yeah, I think from a PR perspective, Alonso would make sense, I guess, because it would be amazing and everyone will get excited and Vettel will be back, kind of thing. But for performance, Drugovich, surely right. On Adam's point about how Drugovich was so good, it also shows that the Aston, or it underlines how good the Aston Martin is, because the fact he could do that and what didn't look out of place. I think we got to give big credit to engineering and technical team there as well.
You've got to do that. You're right. You've got to say Drugovich has done a very, very good test. His audition has been exceptional, and he is contracted to be race fit in a way that Sebastian Vettel isn't, which I think is quite a big point that is easy to forget. So yeah, word will come this week, as I'm sure those listening and you guys are aware that we'll see. We might even wait till Wednesday or Thursday before we find out who's going to be in the car out of Stroll, Drugovich, or surprise cameo here. Insert surprise cameo here. But if it ends, Van Dorn. If it is Hulkenberg, that'd be absolutely hilarious. If there's some kind of weird contractual wrangling ends up happening and Mick Schumacher drives the Haas, would be weird. I mean, actually, to be honest, Mick Schumacher's hanging around. He wouldn't be a bad driver to call up.
Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, then you've got your dream Schumacher Alonso lineup. Look at that.
But I think it is like. Nigel mentioned the PR point of view before, but for Aston Martin, like, what's the point if you're then going to use Mercedes reserve driver? What's the point of having your reserve driver?
Yes, totally the right thing to say. And they've used a reserve driver in the past because, admittedly, Hulkenberg was contracted to do it and did well, so they've got reason to support a reserve and to back him. So
was he contracted to do it in 2020?
He was for the Nürburgring.
But not for Silverstone.
Not for Silverstone.
Silverstone, he was like driving to a race in Germany.
Silverstone, he was in Germany in the morning. He was
racing like touring cars there or something, wasn't he?
Oh, was he? I didn't know that, because I think there's a picture they put online of him on the phone with a pastry, or a massive cake or something. Just like being on the phone, like, oh, I've just been phoned by Otmar.
He was getting ready to compete in during German touring cars or something, and then got the call to go and race F1 instead. And
he's back. It's worked. He's back in Formula One. So the reserve driver gig works if they let you reserve. Anyway, moving on to what was the fourth fastest team last year, Alonso's departed team, Alpine. Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, both performing all right. A team probably didn't really put a foot wrong, I think, but didn't really show their hand either. So I think we've kind of just got to take it at face value. They'll be in a similar position, don't you think?
Yeah, I think maybe there's. I think there's been maybe a bit too much negativity about Alpine. I think actually I think they've got a lot of promise. They maybe were they seem to have some bad porpoising, particularly at the end of the session, but you also don't know. Teams were running their cars to try and find where they had porpoising. So you don't know kind of what the cause of that was and where that's come from. So, yeah, I think maybe some of the worries have been a bit overblown. They've got a good driver lineup. They've got, I think that fundamentally they've got a good car. And it's, if Aston Martin didn't have a car that was like potentially being a podium in the first race, then it would be a nice battle between them. But I think they've definitely, for me, they've got fifth locked down so far.
Yeah, I agree with that. There has been a bit of negativity about Alpine. I think the technical director Harman, he said they've got a big upgrade coming for the first race this weekend. So I think that suggests that they've got a good baseline car and they're happy with the reliability and how the car was performing and testing different things. And now they're going to put on a bit more performance on, and we'll see their full hand as well. So they potentially closed the gap to Mercedes and Ferrari. But yeah, I certainly don't think they're in an awful place. I think they're probably in a similar. They've probably got a similar deficit to what they had in the second half of last season, probably.
Yeah, I think it's a team we can rely on to be doing all right and to be doing decent performances. I think you both have made correct assessments. I agree with what you've said. And I'd be happy to see them continue where they left off with 2022, where you'd have races like Suzuka, where Ocon would be in a legitimate fourth and things like that. I'd be happy to see them doing performances like that again with Ocon and Gasly.
It's almost a shame for them because I think we're all saying that they've improved from last season, or they, have the strengths that they have last season, but it's just that Mercedes have got a bit closer to the front. Aston Martin have got a lot closer to the front. So even though they've improved, then it actually probably / might not be seen in the results and in the final standings that improvement was there, but they've just been outgained by some of the teams that were around them.
It's interesting because their goal is to be closer to third place, and they could be close to third place but be fifth. So
yeah,
it's an interesting one, but it does point to on face value a relatively positive preseason for Alpine, despite, as you say, people being negative. Now, sixth place is an interesting one. Who do you want to talk about for sixth?
Alfa Romeo, I think.
Yeah, Alfa Romeo. Adam, do you concur?
I'd say Haas, but
let's go Alfa Romeo first, and then we can talk about Haas at the same time afterwards, but in the same ranking.
Well,
sixth is joint Alfa Romeo Haas.
It's interesting. I think both teams last year started off the season quite well, and then they both got out-developed or didn't get the right development path across the season. And it looks like a very similar thing this time or right now, where testing is not very good, and they will be in that 5th, 6th, 7th team position. And then it's about the rest of the season. But again, to improve, make a step forward, and be towards the front of the midfield for those two teams is very, very good. So yeah, I think apart from Bottas's gearbox problem on the final day, both teams ran. In fact, there wasn't really reliability I saw in the whole instance or anything, actually, thinking about it. But yeah, but both teams ran solidly, got plenty of mileage. Long run pace wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad as well. So I think they have like slap bang in the midfield, which is what the midfield is for.
Yeah, I kind of agree with both of that for both of them. For both Haas and Alfa Romeo, I think that is a legitimate thing to say about both teams. It would be interesting to see how their seasons go. I wouldn't be surprised if they've learned from last year a bit more and could be a bit more consistent. I would like to see that. That's what I'd hope for from both of them. But I do think for a fight for your sort of 11th, 12th in qualifying, they're both it will be Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Bottas, Joe pretty tightly, I reckon.
Yeah, I think in terms of the race runs, then they look pretty similar. Magnussen was quicker on the C2 and Joe was quicker on the C1 and 3. But it was all pretty marginal, to be honest. So I think just covering Haas, Steiner said that it was the best preseason they've ever had, and they've had some better seasons than they have in recent times. So yeah, I think that's a definite positive, and it looks quite comfortable on all areas of the track. they got a lot of laps in as well. I think they were the 4th highest lapping team. So it just looks very positive. But I'd echo what both of you said, that with the teams around them that may have more of the resources, more of the development plans than they do, then it is absolutely vital to be getting onto that early on in the season. It will be who can take their chances that really could decide the Constructors' Championship position between them.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting, actually. Günther Steiner saying it's their best preseason, because have had some all right preseasons. I think we've already spoken about 2018, and actually 2019 was a very good preseason for them as well, if the season didn't follow. I am really genuinely interested in where these teams lie, because they capitalized very well in 2022 at the start of the year, and very, very definitely solidified their championship positions based on the start of the year, and it worked. Alfa Romeo stayed in 6th and has stayed in were able to hold on to 8th, because if you take the points from the second half of the season, they would have been 9th or 10th. So they basically need to come out the blocks well. The team which doesn't look like it will do that is McLaren. There's been a lot of negativity around McLaren, and I think the fact that we're talking about them now means that we are being negative about McLaren as well. It's a new concept of a car, but it looks like the changes they've made have made the car worse than it was where it finished last year, rather than a step up in any way. Adam, where do you stand with McLaren for 2023?
I mean, it's not good, and this is what I referenced earlier with Aston Martin and Mercedes, is how high do you jump Aston Martin up, and can they bridge that up? Actually, McLaren, it's the other way down, is how far are you willing to drop them? Are you willing to put them back into that battle at the back and take them out of the midfield? And that's really what I'm wrestling with for my constructors predictions, which we'll come on to in our season preview. But I think it's just really, they didn't get a lot of laps in. They had the issue with the I forget what it's called, but on the top of the wheel, where they were having to kind of duct tape it on and then dry that, and it was just very bodged, and neither driver looked massively comfortable. Norris looked more comfortable, but he's looked comfortable with every McLaren he's driven, and this is probably at the bottom of the pile, I'd say. Piastri, the last thing he needs is a difficult car to get his head around, even though he is phenomenally talented. So it just feels like there's not, and there were kind of reports coming out of the team that actually it's not looking good internally, that Norris isn't happy, and how exaggerated or not those are remains to be seen. But I don't think they're going to be coming away from this happy at all. So yeah, it's really, the only hope is the way they improved over the course of last season. But I think certainly in Bahrain, it's going to be quite a humbling Grand Prix for them.
Yeah, I think. Well, I spoke a couple of weeks ago about the technical team, about how they have much confidence in them, let's say, and that's kind of coming true now. I'd say I will be a bit careful on McLaren, because I think after the first race last year, they had the worst results, or went on a big rant about them for 2 or 3 minutes, but then they ended up being okay. But it does feel different this round. I think the team have already said they're going to bring almost a B-spec car for after the 4-week breaks of round 4 in Baku, which is a good sign. Obviously, the first 3 races, it does seem they'll do very well to score points, quite frankly, in the first 3 races. I see it. It just looks like there's a lack of downforce. I think aerodynamically, the car is not producing the downforce they want. It's not hitting the targets. I think the team have admitted that already. So when you're saying that in testing, you've not hit your targets in terms of downforce, which is what F1 is all about, then you're going to be in serious trouble.
It depends on where you set your targets, to be fair. If their targets are very easy targets and they're not hitting them, yeah, cry. But if your targets are, you're wanting to be where Red Bull were in the test last year, and your McLaren,
they would have been aiming for top midfield, though, wouldn't they? Sure.
Yeah.
So
they should have been, but not hitting targets sometimes can be it isn't the be all and end all, but they aren't performing well is the other side of it. Do you think there's an element of that it's just a bad car, and just getting out and just completing the test was just putting it behind them? Because they did have a bad test in Bahrain last year. I think Norris didn't do any running because he had for some days because he had brake issues, but then they were on the podium in Imola. So there are there are sides of it that can be. That it's a team that has historically had to work in different ways and has worked pretty well to get that back. But if it's, I don't know if we're looking at it from a more of an inherent car perspective than from a just a bad test. We don't know yet, really.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of comfort to drive compared to other years is really the thing that's doing it for me. But like Piastri had a spin on day 3, but yeah, it's like that's the thing with the early season. I think we'll talk about more about this next episode, but the 5 races over the first 2 months, so it's the kind of body of points that you can get at the end after you have had that in-season development time is a lot bigger than body of points you can get at the start by coming out at the Bahrain Grand Prix, the Bahrain test, having a great car. So that's really the saving grace, or could be the saving grace for McLaren. So it's hard to extrapolate this over the course of the season, but I think certainly this isn't an overreaction over the first race, over the first couple of races.
I think last year wasn't this bad, I feel. Well, I just obviously can't go on something based on feeling, but it just does feel and look worse. And we've talked previously about how Seidel leaving. To me, that was a sign. It just, I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm 100% wrong.
We'll see. We'll see. And
it doesn't look good.
Even if McLaren are bad in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, it is a team that I think could still have good races in the season, and I think Lando Norris is a driver to not discount, even with that car.
And we saw just quickly, we saw how Aston Martin, they were pretty poor over the first few races as well, actually. But then they brought a B spec car to Spain, and then they absolutely motored along and went up the pecking order. Yeah, they could have been 6. So, and it could be a similar for McLaren. They bring that B spec car, bring those upgrades in Baku or the 4th or 5th round, and then they fire on from there. But for the next 3 races, I personally think they'll struggle to be into the top 10 on pole pace.
But hey, it's not all bad news because we've still got 2 more teams to talk about. Hooray for McLaren, but not for them, because we're going to now talk about AlphaTauri, who, in my opinion, have one of the worst looking liveries in Formula One since the 2019. But anyway, that's just a personal viewpoint of a car that I don't like the look of. Doesn't look like it's gonna do much this year. Looks like it's an improvement on last year, but still a car that, where you think about it, they got 1 or 2 points finishes since in like the last 15 races of 2022. So it looks like I just feel like it's going to be more of the same, and the car is just there.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if it's an improvement on last year, to be honest. I think they could be worse. Might be slightly ahead of them, perhaps. There's absolutely nothing from what I've seen, short run, long run, the balance of the car as well to have to positive about, unfortunately. Someone's got to be last. And AlphaTauri, just from the lap times and the balance of the car, didn't look very good at all to me.
Yeah, I agree. It's just the problem is that the other teams around them have improved and they don't really look like they have. So yeah, it might be slightly better than last year's car, but Williams, we'll talk about them in a second, look like they have taken that step forward. They've also got Sargent in, who look better instead of Latifi. So that also really, maybe not doubles, but increases their ability to score points on those, getting into the 8th, 9th, 10th places on occasion. So yeah, it's not. It's just kind of demoralizing, really. But having said that, they're not the team with the biggest resources. They're working with some Red Bull parts from last year's car. It's not. They are kind of underdogs in many senses. But having said that, it's kind of reflecting the season. I think they will be battling for 9th or 10th.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also agree with Nigel putting Williams a little bit higher, just because I think they've got a capability with Alex Albon of getting a result, really, in a way that you look at sort of De Vries, Tsunoda, and probably Sargent, because he's an unknown quantity, but hasn't acquitted himself badly in this test. I think we should say. I think coupled with him, De Vries, Drogovic, and Piastri, really, as drivers to sort of couple in as unknowns. They've all done pretty well in this test, in my opinion, and haven't looked out of place as F1 drivers. But I think Albon is the sort of kicker in that AlphaTauri Williams group that could do well in the season, and he seems to have got a kind of a better car underneath him, still with one or two limitations, but just with a steady improvement for this year. I think the test kind of just points to that only, really. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think maybe the kicker maybe is the engine. That I think the Mercedes engine still looks slower than the Ferrari and Red Bull, so that won't help. And Williams struggled with that last season. But yeah, it's a weird one. I was talking about this with Nigel yesterday. Is being in ninth place a win for Williams? I don't know, because it's not, that shouldn't really be a success if they're serious about making their way up the grid. But at the same time, you've got to start somewhere, and somewhere is improving on your position from last year, and that is ninth place for them. So yeah, I'm positive. I think came away actually more positive on Sargent than I was going into the test. I thought he acquitted himself well, especially on day 2. He put in some fast times and just looked more comfortable with the car. So yeah, it's not a world beater. I think we are still talking about 9th or 10th, but
yeah,
like we say, just being part of that pack at the back is really a step forward for them. So yeah, it's a start.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with all those points. It's probably the best car since they've had since 2017, maybe. Because I mean, 4 or 5 years they haven't built many good cars, to be honest. So I reckon probably since 2017, this is the best car looking at testing alone. So with the Apple performance, I don't think they're going to be, they're still going to be pushing to get out Q1, that kind of thing. But it should be easier to get out of Q1 than when Albon out of it last year a few times.
Yes, I agree with that. Right, so really, that's the 10 teams. Thankfully, there's no Andretti to make this podcast longer. But for now, shall we just go through bottom to top the official Winging It F1 pecking order for this end of the preseason test, the start of the Formula One season? Not where we think the Constructors' Championship positions are going to end. We're going to do that in a quick fire predictions episode later in the week. But for now, our collective 10th place is Williams. Do we think? Not Williams. AlphaTauri. I just didn't listen to what you said.
Yeah. AlphaTauri, yeah.
AlphaTauri. 9th, Williams.
Yeah.
8th, are we going to say McLaren?
Yeah.
I want to say McLaren 8th.
I think I'd agree with that. Yeah.
7th, Alfa Romeo or Haas?
I think 7th, Alfa Romeo. I like Haas a bit more.
I think Haas is 7th.
Casting vote. I think Haas 7th. Just because Haas, but they always go well.
I think Alfa Romeo have got a bit more one pace, so I think that could just get. I think they could Bottas might get 10th or 9th and then hold on in the race.
6th Alfa Romeo, then 5th.
Despite you saying Bottas doesn't do well in midfield, wheel-to-wheel driving.
Yeah, but he qualifies well.
Yeah, but then he has to drive the race against other cars.
Yeah,
but if the cars in front of him if the cars in front of Bottas are getting in the way, then Bottas doesn't have anyone to follow. He can just hold off the others, and that's easier than following cars. That's my logic there.
You're getting bogged down now, guys.
You don't like him in wheel to wheel, and if someone's overtaking him, then they're going to be wheel to wheel.
4th is Mercedes or Aston Martin?
5th is Alpine.
4th is an interesting one. Because I'm
going with Mercedes.
I'll go with Mercedes as well.
Yeah. Look at that, guys. We're groundbreaking. 3rd, Aston Martin.
Yeah.
2nd, Ferrari. 1st,
Ferrari?
Red Bull. Nigel's still computing whether to put Aston Martin 2nd.
Can I blast? It would be super bored of me, wouldn't it? Yeah, but I'm not talking about Alonso, obviously.
Yeah, I know, that helps.
Alonso could be 2nd, overall. Not in qualifying, but in the race. He could be 2nd.
Well, we've already decided, Nigel, Aston Martin 3rd for the
win. Yeah, we have. I'm just talking to myself.
That's fine. You can do it. You can do podcasts on your own now. We figured that one out, so Adam and I can take a week off and just leave you to natter.
I've got one last question. How far ahead do we think Red Bull are? Is it going to be a front row lookout 1-2 in the race? Is it going to be that good, do you think?
Not front row lockout, very potentially 1-2 in the race. But the driver winning the first race hasn't won the World Championship since 2016, so maybe they don't want that.
That fun start.
What a stat, blimey. Well, there we are then. We have a pecking order. We have a race coming up to see how wrong we are or how right we are, because obviously we're going to be correct. And
well, me and you, Freddie, were last year. Adam, not so much.
I don't think we were. We didn't say McLaren were going to be and Aston Martin were going to be that far back, did we?
I can't remember.
I'll take it though. Yes, I was right. And
was I.
On that
note,
we'll be back later in the week with essentially a season predictions pod where we quick fire go around ourselves and say things like Nigel's gonna hate Baku and stuff like that. It's gonna be a bit hectic and raucous and fun. A fun way to start the season after this quite serious, quite analytical podcast. I can't speak. Podcast. So tune in for that later in the week and we hope you look forward to the season as much as we do. Have a good one, everybody, and look after yourselves. Au revoir.
Adios.
Bonjour.